Hello, everyone. I want to welcome you to our talk on native or non-natives in cover crops and pollinator plantings. Just so everybody knows, we're focusing on California. That's where the Seeds for Bees program is located. If you're out of the state, some of the plants that we mentioned might not be natives to your area, but the general ideas will help with your own endeavors. I'm Stetson Maldonado, and I'm here with Tom Johnson.
Welcome back.
Yes, welcome back. Here's a roadmap of what we're going to go over. We're going to talk about what is a native plant in the first place, what do they provide, and we're going to discuss about seeds and genetics, and then I'll transfer it over to Tom to talk about domesticated natives and putting them in cover crops or in pollinator plantings. Here for the photo that I got, this is a planting of baby blue eyes and 5-spot, and they are both native to California. They're very beautiful too. I really enjoy them. So here we have what is a native plant, just so that as we continue to talk, we have an idea of a shared definition. I assembled this from a variety of definitions I found online, which is a native plant is a plant species which has evolved and adapted in a specific geological area over thousands of years without human introduction. And then another factor is that these plants have evolved or co-evolved with other native species, such as other plants, animals, and insects. In this picture, the poppies, the California poppies, are the native. Tom, what's that yellow flower with the white rim? Is that one a native
The
or?
the yellow flower is tidy tips,
Okay.
is the common name for it. And then the real little red spikes are crimson clover, which is an introduced plant, but
Yes.
often used in this type of planting for flowers and pollinator support.
Mm. They're also a good forage for grazing animals and for fixing nitrogen. And I like the lupins in the background. I wish my yard looked like this. This is pretty.
It takes a little bit of effort and a little bit of luck to make your yard look like this.
Mm. So we're going to discuss why natives are so important and why people want them in the first place. So in this picture, I have Lacey Phacelia, and Tom will be talking about the background and the history of Lacey Phacelia. This is one that we do have in our wildflower planting. We're now changing that over to the bee yard mix, and we're looking at adding that to one of our cover crops as well. So typically, native plants support more native species than non-native plants. Not all natives are going to support all native animals or insects. There are some that are called keystone plant species. So these are plants that support a huge variety of insects, birds, maybe other kinds of larger animals. But these are plant species that make a big impact on their environmental community. So for this one, I haven't researched it a lot. Someone brought it up in a talk, but oaks apparently are a really important keystone species. And they were saying that they could support, I think, well over 100, if not a couple hundred different kinds of insect species. And they could support a lot of them. A good story that I remember is in the spring, my sister and I would love to sleep outside on the back porch of my parents' place. But if it was a really windy night, we'd wake up covered in caterpillars because there's just so many caterpillars on these oaks that would knock them down, and we'd end up wearing them, which was not the most pleasant. You don't expect to wake up in a bed of caterpillars, but it demonstrates how the oaks in particular was such a great keystone species for all that insect life. There's also insect specialization. I put milkweed here. So most everybody is familiar with how milkweed is so important for the monarch. It's the only host plant for that species. There's other ones as well. I have a plant called mule fat, not as pretty as a milkweed, but it's in my front yard, and it is a host plant for the fatal metal mark butterfly. So hopefully, fingers crossed, I'll get to see one of those. And there's also a lot of preserving what was here. I mean, humans have had a huge impact all over the world and amongst our animals and our species, and maintaining what was here in a world where if there's a lot of pressure to remove it it's important, is keeping the things that might otherwise go extinct around. Um, and then there's a lot of cultural ties. So I put goldback fern. There's probably another species that would have been better for this example, but I really love the goldback fern. It's a really small fern. I don't think it supports very many native creatures, but it was used a lot in medicine by the native peoples of California. And it's also, if you get it right when it's producing all the little spores, if you put it against your skin, it'll leave a bright yellow imprint of the fern. And there have been some records in journals that children would use that as a like body decor, be the fern stamps. And then it feels good. It feels good because you're making a difference, you're doing something that most people aren't doing, and you're adding to your environment in a way that is beneficial. So there's definitely the feel good aspect of having natives in your on your property or in your farm system. Most of my front yard plants are natives. I have a friend who calls it my virtue signaling garden. I enjoy it because I get to watch the bugs show up.
Yeah, my HOA won't like quite let me do that yet. So
Yeah, that's the thing. HOAs, they definitely want to control how things look, and that could make using natives difficult. I don't have an HOA, so I can plant whatever I want, which is awesome. Unless it's illegal, then I'll have the police show up. I have no illegal plants, just putting that out there. So here is some of the background about why native seed is low in stock. So why is it hard to get a hold of and why is it so expensive? The first and foremost is market shifts. So what people wanted last year, they might not want this year. And if you put all that time, effort, and money into growing out the seed and then harvesting it, and no one shows up to buy it, and you just have this bulk seed taking up some area on your in your storage yard or whatever, and it's costing you money to protect it from insects and from rats. It costs you money to produce it. And if someone gets burned like that, then they're not going to be producing that seed anymore. And they're going to be more risk averse to trying to produce more seed or seed from other species. So for example, California poppy, a lot of people want California poppy. You're going to be pretty comfortable producing some of that seed compared to my personal favorite that I really want and I have the hardest time to get a hold of, which is Grindelia. It is not as pretty and it seems like nobody's producing it and very few people want to buy it in the first place. So that's my loss. I get my one Grindelia plant, I guess. Um, so availability, sometimes there's not much seed to start off with. It makes a lot of sense to grow something. You have to have the seed to plant it. And that seed could be difficult to get a hold of. It could be difficult to sprout and cultivate. And a lot of that could be, there might be a requirement to collect that from wild stock. Something that I didn't appreciate when comparing domesticated plants and wild plants is germination. So a lot of wild plants, they don't want all their seed to germinate at once because they're going to compete with each other. If there was a bad weather event and they all died, you just lost all of your future generations. So they want to hedge their bets and have some plants germinate quickly. Some may take a really long time. Tom was telling me that's called hard seed. I don't know. I guess it depends on species on how long it can take hard seed to germinate as far as years. But if you're trying to plant that and then harvest it that year, that could be really frustrating. And then having it show up when you planted something else could be equally frustrating. So there's a lot of difficulty in trying to cultivate these native species compared to a domesticated species where you plant it, almost everything germinates, it all matures, and then you harvest it. That's much easier compared to our native species. And then cultivation as well. It takes time, money, and land. The Grindelia I really like. I believe it's a perennial, if I'm correct, Tom.
for a biennial perennial, yes.
A biennial or perennial, which
Yeah.
means even with a biennial, that's 2 years of
Yeah.
investment compared.
2 years before it blooms and produces seed potentially. And it may be
Mhm.
longer than that. So yeah, it takes time. So, and if you start out with a handful of seed and you need a lot of seed, it may take 3 to 4 years basically to get up to that point.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, part of why native seed or native wildflower seed is low in stock most of the time and usually expensive is limited demand and the vagaries of germination, cultivation, how much effort goes in to get back what you're going to get, and then they will ripen over different times. So it's harder to harvest them and get the majority of the seed at the right time.
Yeah. And Tom's going to go more into detail on that when it comes to what domesticated means for native plants. So here's another layer, which is location-specific genetics. So not only are natives specific to a region, there's also natives that are locally adapted to your area. So where I'm at here in the California Central Valley, the same species that I can get my hands on that's native from here is going to have slightly different genetics from something that I found in the California foothills or up in the Sierra Nevada mountain range. They're all going to have specific genetics that help them survive and thrive in those locations. And there's a number of regulations for some grants, and there's people who want to specifically procreate the genetics from that area if they're planting in another location in that general vicinity. The difficulty with that is you have to gather the seed. So you have to go hiking, you have to go traveling out into the middle of nowhere, and you have to find that plant in the first place, preferably a patch of those plants. And then you need to collect those seeds, and they're not going to be all ready at the same time. So you want to catch them before they start shattering or falling from that plant, but you also don't want to be so early that none of them are ripe. Um, Generally, as a rule of thumb for being more eco-conscious, is not taking more than 20% of the seed in that patch. You don't want to show up and then just mow down all of those native plants, take all the seed, and then having harmed that area for future seed production. And then not only do you have to collect the seed, you have to either grow it yourself or contract with a seed supplier. So this person's going to propagate the seed. So imagine you went hiking out into the middle of nowhere, you found your perfect native plant, you got what, a pound of seed, and you need 100 pounds of seed. That could take a couple growing seasons of planting your first batch, raising it up, harvesting that seed, planting that seed, raising it up. So that can take quite a few years, depending on the volume of seed you get in the first place and how much seed you need at the end of that propagation period. And here I will toss it over to Tom to talk about domesticated natives. I thought this was really fascinating. I didn't know that about this until recently. So Tom, take it away.
Okay, well, domesticated natives, contradiction in terms, of course, it sounds like, but what that boils down to is we've taken a wildflower or a wild plant or a wild organism and it has learned to survive in a certain situation, but it also shows up in a lot of other places. It goes back to the eco territorial thing that Stetson just mentioned on same plant, three different zones. One works and the one in one zone won't work in another zone as well. So what they've done over the years is basically take those plants, collect them, and start selecting them for them. A lot of examples of what they're trying to select out is lower germination barriers, that hard seed factor, poor germination factors. Plants that produce 100 seeds and only 5 or 6 are actually viable, even when they're all ripe and ready for some reason or another. The next year it may reverse, but on the other hand, the year you collected it, yeah, I got a 3% germ. I've got to figure out how to select away from that. Altered plant heights. Some plants, more so in the shrubs than the wildflowers, but there are plants that have evolved to be short and sprawl versus the same plant from another location gets about 10 feet tall. So those are kind of like variety, basically making a variety type of thing. And when you're going to cultivate and produce a plant or seed from a plant, you're looking for a uniform life cycle. You want to be able to go out there and harvest it at one time and maximize your yield, your seed yield off of that. So the first time around, you're actually starting to do that selection for that. You're not necessarily breeding for it, you're selecting for it. You're pulling out the plants that fit what you need type of thing. So you get that uniform harvest over time. Wheat, something everybody knows about, and barley started out as weeds that were slowly but surely selected so that they all harvested at the same time. And the maximum amount is ripe all at the same time and doesn't shatter and doesn't fall apart. Those are other things that go into this thing you're selecting for. I don't want it to pop open and throw the seed all over the place 2 days before I was ready to do it. I would prefer that pod stays closed a little bit longer, or it doesn't violently pop open and spread seed like poppies might. This one really kind of applies to the story of Lacey Facilia. Lacey Facilia is a California native that was selected, harvested, collected in California in the late 1800s and actually taken back to Germany. I believe it was selected because it was a good pollen and nectar supplier for the bumblebee that you see in this picture, honeybees, and almost every other pollen gathering, nectar gathering insect out there will visit that plant, and it'll bloom for quite some time. It's widely adapted, but they took it back to Germany and started to select it for these other things: uniform harvest cycle, uniform plant size. And as they did that, they also found it had other attributes that they could use. So it's actually used as a cover crop in some rotations in some places for antagonistic things against other things. So you can actually see, if you planted seed from 4 sources, you could see 4 different plant shape size characteristics of the same plant side by side. So there was a short one, there was a tall skinny one, there was one that was like had great big flower, great big loose flowers, and the other one had really tight flowers. So those things are, there's different varieties per se of Facilia out there now because of 100 and some odd years of domestication that's gone on with it. And then for using natives in cover crops, they're in there for a specific reason most of the time, and they're typically planted in fall or winter in California. Our climate basically is fall and winter rain, warm spring, dry summer. So a lot of these plants are either very strong annuals, very strong perennials that can survive a lot of that stuff. So they're in there for whatever reason we put them in there. Most, unfortunately, are going to get terminated while they're flowering, which means they're not going to receive very well unless you're actively trying to get them to do that. A lot of natives will flower over a longer period of time if they have enough resources to do it, but a lot of them will basically flower once, maybe twice, and say, okay, I'm done. I'm good. I made my seed. I'm going to go away. They're an annual plant. They're kind of programmed to do that. So when we would put them in a cover crop, we're going to design that cover crop to accommodate some of that activity. So we're going to plant those things in cropped low, less disturbed areas like drive rows or places that aren't going to be mowed early, aren't going to be driven on, aren't going to be disturbed as much while they're growing. So that's kind of what we're after on that type of thing. We're also going to utilize ones that are quick to establish and grow fast for the mere reason that we're putting it in a cover crop. Cover crop's not going to be there forever. We want it in there. It's got to compete with the rest of the type of the thing. So it's which ones we're going to choose to use a lot of times are going to depend on the goals of our cover crop. Are we trying to feed pollinators, native and other kind? Are we trying to attract a specific insect that is associated with that native plant? Or we're looking for, I've done some where basically they were looking for a white flower in the background of a wedding. So yeah, that's I'm not going to argue with you on it. It's just we're going to try and design it so it fits, and then develop a program that makes it work, type of thing.
Yeah, and I wanted to add that we're not saying that natives have no place in cover crops, but often for cover crops, the requirements are much stricter than the next topic we're going to talk about, which is pollinator plantings.
Yeah, and the other thing is the seed's expensive, so that comes to play as well. A cover crop is not necessarily going to be kept forever.
Mm-hmm.
So where they fit, like I said, in drive rows, less disturbed areas, and so on and so forth. So we use a lot of natives in what we would call these pollinator plantings. What we'd call a pollinator pasture, which in my definition is an area that you're going to set aside and doesn't support your crop. You're not planning on farming it for some period of time, if putting it back to rewilding it basically. And you're going to be planting that with flowering or pollinator specific plants. Um, Pollinator strips and the pastures and strips, a lot of times people interchange the term basically, but I would call a strip as a temporary implication or implementation. So that's going to be fence lines, again, those non-traveled, non-worked up areas, but that aren't going to be there forever. Fence lines, field edges, more so where I've seen it used a lot of times is irrigation lines, where you have a solid set sprinkler system that's going to be there for the season of the crop or the next 2 seasons of crop type of thing. And drainage strips that may get, if you re-level the field, you don't need that strip out there anymore. Basically, it's probably going to be tore out. But in the meantime, you had that temporary pollinator habitat, pollinator pasture out there for them type of thing. Hedgerows, a lot of times do include, the majority that we'll use is hedgerow, and hedgerows are native plants. And a lot of that's what we put the shrubs in. We'll put the annual and biennial wildflowers in there basically as early feed forage for your pollinators and make it look nice and designate the area type of thing. But we'll also interject shrubs, and a lot of these shrubs also are valuable sources of flowering for native pollinators, honeybees, butterflies, things like that. So milkweed fits in that. In this picture here, we've got ceanothus, we've got elderberry, and we've got a deergrass plant in there. So it's also a varied thing, much more like what originally the natural habitat, the natural landscape looked like. So we've got a little bit of everything. It's not a monoculture like the wheat field you're right next to, or the tomato field that you're right next to, or the almonds or the grapes or whatever that you've put that next to. That's essentially a monoculture. Now you've put a little bit something else over here that is going to support more things. So that's kind of the idea on a hedgerow as a permanent installation. Pollinator pasture, permanent installation. You're not planning to go back into it and tear it up and start over again. Whereas our pollinator strips is probably things that we're going to put in for a year or so. This would also fit what we call a habitat strip cover crop.
Or a yard.
That's going to be managed a little bit different than the rest of the cover crop in the orchard or vineyard. Basically, you're going to try and manage it for those flowers for that pollinator support.
Something else I wanted to highlight is the length of time is such an important factor. So a cover crop, it's only going to be around for a couple months, maybe half a year at best, while these hedgerows and the pollinator pasture, they're going to be around year over year. And that's going to really affect what tries to grow on those plants. So maybe a lepidopteran, so a butterfly or a moth, it'll lay an egg on that plant. That egg will turn into a caterpillar. It'll live its little caterpillar life. It'll pupate. That takes an extended period of time to happen. And you're not going to be able to support those things in a cover crop, typically like you would with a hedgerow plant. Imagine trying to use an oak, for example. An oak would be a wonderful addition to a hedgerow. And that's going to be something that's going to provide year over year compared to something that was blooming and then got mowed down.
Yeah, so it's a shift in thinking about what we're going to do with what we're trying to achieve and what we're going to use to do that.
Mm. And then I could take this slide, Tom, but I wanted to thank everyone for attending this webinar and for taking the time out of your day just to hear what we had to say about natives and non-natives and how they could be best used. And I want to thank our donors. The people have been keeping this program alive and running for almost well over a decade now. A lot of them have been with us from the very beginning. If you are interested in donating to us, or if you find yourself in the future with the ability to donate, but maybe not this year, you can scan the QR code and that'll take you to our donation page. And I'll also include a link in the bottom of this video along with all of our other videos. Well, I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your day and always come back and see our other videos. I've been having a lot of fun making these and interrogating Tom on different topics.
Thank you again for attending.